a spectrum of environmental organizations, but I do think that we often shoot ourselves in the foot. That, we demand the perfect in place of the good. And I think WRA takes a different track. We're willing, if not compromise, that we understand the complexities of the work we do, and we want to find solutions that work. My name is Anjali Bean. I am a Senior Policy Advisor for Healthy Rivers here at Western Resource Advocates. So I work on state level rivers and water policy in New Mexico. Yeah, so this is the neighborhood that I grew up in, the South Valley of Albuquerque. And as you can see behind us, these are a wide network of irrigation ditches were essentially my backyard. So I spent a lot of time on these ditches as a kid, and this was really the first natural environment, such as it is, that I experienced. I think it took me a long time to realize the complexities of this so-called natural environment, because it is in fact a built environment, but it was the only natural space that I really experienced on the daily as a kid. Yeah, I mean, New Mexico is really lucky to have a wide and huge variety of landscapes and locations throughout the state. Other than this area, I spent a lot of time in the Manzano Mountains as a kid, which are the mountains southeast of Albuquerque. They're the lesser known mountains of New Mexico, but certainly beautiful, and spent a lot of time in those mountains as well. I don't think growing up here, I probably understood that environmental advocacy was a job that somebody could have. It was not something that I was around a lot as a teenager, but I went to college in undergrad in Washington, D.C. at American University, which is a very policy and advocacy oriented college. And it was there that I started to understand that this was work that you could get paid to do, that could be a career. I'd done work in various advocacy worlds. I spent a long time in the international development, global policy world in DC, but it was all essentially about helping the world, protecting people, and protecting spaces. As I said, I spent my 20s in the DC area, and I had some summer jobs and some various experience working in the Anacostia River Basin, which is one of the rivers that runs through DC. And I think it was really the first time that I truly internalized the impact that our environmental decisions have on our communities. That when you look, there's two rivers that run through DC, the Potomac River and the Anacostia. One goes through a very affluent part of the city, and one goes through a not very affluent part. And working on that river and understanding the different issues that occurred on those rivers, and the different types of funding and the different types of organizations that worked on those two rivers that were, less than 5 miles from each other, and in fact come to a confluence. The Anacostia leads into the Potomac, and that really, I think, made me understand. It made me understand how these things all connect, and the concepts of environmental justice, and how our environment is critically important to how we exist in our communities and in our lives. I think, like a lot of New Mexicans, I was very, very excited to leave as a young person. Getting out of New Mexico academically was always a goal of mine, and I did that. That was really important to me, and I think it was really important to leave. I think a lot of people feel like they get stuck in New Mexico sometimes, and it was important that this was a choice for me to live here, not just an inevitability. But I left for college. I spent about 10 years in the DC area, and then when looking at grad schools at that point, I was really called back to New Mexico. I was called back to the University of New Mexico and their water program. That program at the time had a real focus on how our environment and the people that work in these spaces really interact with each other, and how the social capital and community structures around our water institutions really create the policy that we have today, and that was something that was really interesting to me. So I don't know that I would have expected to come back here. I think if you told me when I was 18 that I would be back living in New Mexico in my 30s, I certainly wouldn't have been happy about it, I don't think, but at this point in my life, I definitely don't regret it. I'm really glad to be back. I think WRA was always really attractive to me. I find our pragmatic approach to environmental policy and advocacy work really exciting. I think there's a spectrum of environmental organizations, but I do think that we often shoot ourselves in the foot. That, we demand the perfect in place of the good, and aren't willing, especially in a state like New Mexico, working on water, where water is so scarce, that environmental organizations that demand perfection and demand the most that they can possibly get don't end up being good partners, and they don't end up getting what they want out of our water negotiations and our water management decisions. I think one of the special things about New Mexico is that in a lot of ways it feels like a small town. That can be good and bad, but there's a lot of frustration in how policy and governance works in New Mexico, but there's also a lot of opportunities. And if you're willing to build those relationships and come at it from a place of openness and curiosity, that you can really make really meaningful change with not a lot of people. And in bigger states where bureaucracy is more complicated and things are a little bit more entrenched, that feels harder. And so I think New Mexico is an exciting place currently with our political structure to really make really significant positive change. I think WRA brings a really good size of an organization to make a real difference in New Mexico. That it's big enough that we have support, we have staff that works on government relations, on communications, on administration. We have that type of support as an organization for ourselves and for the work that we do, but we're also nimble enough to be able to make quick decisions, especially when you work in New Mexico policy at the legislature. Things are fairly informal as far as legislatures go, and so you really have to be able to make quick decisions. I think this work is hard, especially when you're looking at the rivers and water future in New Mexico. It's pretty grim. There's water in the ditches this morning, but there's almost a zero chance that the water will remain for the entire water year, and that's a really scary thing for the river itself, for the riparian system that needs the water, for the farmers that depend on this irrigation water. So it can be really scary. But I think, especially in New Mexico right now, there is a real, no pun intended, a real confluence of actions that are really exciting. We have policymakers, legislators, administrative appointees in our state government that are really interested in multi-benefit solutions. So finding ways that we can maintain our agricultural history and our communities, maintain our acequias, maintain tribal water and our obligations to our tribes and pueblos, and keep our rivers wet and surviving. So I think that's an exciting time. It hasn't always been the case in New Mexico, but I am hopeful that a new paradigm of water management is really starting.